We are delighted to have our last distinguished speaker of the year, and Patrick Park will introduce him.
So I'm happy to have Dr. David Rand here at our seminar today. Dr. Rand is the Erwin Schell Professor of Management Science and Brain and Cognitive Sciences at the MIT Sloan School of Business. He was selected as a Poets and Quants Best 40 Under 40 Business School Professors in 2021, and as Thinkers 50 Radar in 2023. So his research spans a range of fundamental and timely topics, including human cooperation, decision-making, and polarization, and has really deepened our understanding of the psychological underpinnings of online misinformation. His works employ mathematical models, virtual and field experiments on social media platforms, and he's been integrating large language models to his methodological toolkit, as we will see in today's talk. So without further ado, I turn it to Dr. Rand.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to tell you about this new paper that we have been working on in the last few months. So this is joint work with Tom Costello and Gord Pennycook. Gord's a professor at Cornell, and Tom was our joint postdoc, but he will be a professor at American in the fall. Gord and I, for the last 7 or 8 years, have been doing a lot of work on trying to understand misinformation, fake news, things like that, from a sort of cognitive science perspective. I should say, for various things like QR codes are links to papers for people that are online. There's been a lot of work on trying to understand why people believe false claims, why they share them, this sort of thing. And most of this work has involved looking at people's responses to social media posts. Things like, you show them some posts, and you say how accurate you think it is, how likely would you be to share it. And also sometimes we'll do field experiments where we look at people's actual sharing. And I think we've learned a good amount about how people think about this kind of content. For example, we've done a lot of work that really centers the importance of distraction and sort of confusion. That's like a core part of the social media experience. You're scrolling quickly. The news is mixed in with baby pictures and cat videos and memes and all this stuff where accuracy isn't relevant, so you just kind of forget to think about accuracy. And so in one paper, we showed that people's accuracy judgments are way more discerning than their sharing intentions, even though when you ask them explicitly, they say, oh, it's really important to not share accurate content. And we showed that a lot of that is because people just kind of forget to think about whether it's accurate or not. And so subtly prompting them to think about the concept of accuracy before they make their sharing intentions increases the quality of what they share by making them about 10% less likely to say they would share content that's false. And we also have done some field experiments. This is a paper that I'm going to talk about tomorrow at SDS at 12:30 in Porter Hall if people want a double feature. And so we did a big, a field experiment on Facebook with 33 million users and on Twitter with 75,000 users, where we showed them ads telling them to think about accuracy or prompting them to think about accuracy, and we found that it reduced the actual sharing of low quality content. And so I think one of the key take-homes from this for me is this narrative that people are perfectly happy to spread falsehoods and we're in this post-truth era, whatever. I just don't think that that's really true. There are political operatives that are purposely sharing fake things, but I think most normal, regular people don't want to share things that are false. And I think people also don't, in general, want to have inaccurate beliefs. There's evidence in the context of these social media posts, the main thing that tech companies do now is if they have something that's been identified as false by fact checkers, they'll put a warning label on it that says that it's false, then they'll probably also downrank it. But there's a lot of evidence that if you label something as inaccurate, or as false, let's say, then people do really respond to that. In this review, what was led by my grad student, Cameron Martell, who's great, we found that there is, across lots of different surveys or experiments, if you put a label on something, people are something like 25 to 50% less likely to believe that post, less likely to share it. And that's true even for people who say they distrust fact checkers and don't want to see fact checks. So like, people are responsive to information. It's not like even for things that are aligned with their politics, it's not like they just ignore the warnings. But all of this work has, as I was saying, focused on these kinds of one-off exposures to, posts like this that are like, they're not deeply held beliefs. They're just like things that people encounter while they're scrolling along. And so what we wanted to do in this work is we wanted to look at what about the context of beliefs that are really more deeply held, and more maybe sort of core to people's identities. Like, do people still respond to evidence in these contexts or not? And so in order to dig into this question, we look specifically at the context of conspiracy theories. So conspiracy theories, are theories whereby events in the world are understood as being the result of a conspiracy. That is like, a plot, secret plots involving powerful people doing things behind the scenes where, it's not what it seems like. There's actual, it's not the simple explanation that it seems to be, but there's this kind of like secret conspiracy happening behind the scenes. And obviously, sometimes that's true, and there are actual conspiracies in the world. But a lot of the popular conspiracy theories are like quite implausible and not true. Yet, despite the fact that they're really implausible, conspiracy beliefs, that is, beliefs in like conspiracies that are not true, are very widespread. There's various different estimates that have found something like 50% of the US population believes at least one conspiracy theory. And, conspiracy theories are like of particular interest when you're thinking about how people change their beliefs, because correcting them is notoriously hard. They're often used as a paradigmatic example of the kind of belief that doesn't respond to evidence, that doesn't respond to corrections. There's lots of anecdotes around people debating conspiracy theorists and the conspiracy theorists not moving, and there's scientific evidence that it's hard to debunk conspiracy theories. And as a result, this is typically explained by people arguing that conspiracy theories, people want to believe conspiracy theories, essentially. They satisfy psychological needs and motivations. They make you feel in control. They reduce the unpredictability of the world, because instead of there just being random events, actually there was people conspiring to make it happen. That maybe make you feel unique because you understand the conspiracy while all the sheeple out there don't know about it. And so if the conspiracy theories are satisfying these needs, people want to believe them, then that makes them motivated to reject counter-evidence. And like, if there's something that's going to debunk the conspiracy theory, I don't want to hear it because I like believing the conspiracy theory. And so from this, you can conclude that basically once people have gone down the rabbit hole and really gone into a conspiracy theory, it's basically impossible to get them out. And that was more or less my perspective on this. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of questions from journalists and things like that of like, what do you do to talk people out of conspiracy theories? And my answer was generally like, well, once they're in, it's too late. And the thing we really should be focusing on is how do we stop people from believing conspiracies in the first place? For example, by prompting people to think about accuracy before they share, or by putting warnings on, inaccurate posts or whatever. And so therefore, you try and get them before they've really bought in. But, we were reflecting on this, and we're realizing, well, that's one perspective on conspiracy theories. But another perspective is that maybe it's just actually, from a practical perspective, really hard to debunk conspiracy theories, because unlike true events where well, this is the thing that happened, if you're talking about a conspiracy theory that didn't really happen, the definition of the conspiracy theory is not constrained by reality. And so there's lots of different understandings. Even if people that believe in the same conspiracy theory, there's lots of different versions of the conspiracy theory, and there's all different kinds of evidence that people can bring to bear in support of a conspiracy theory. And so if you want to really effectively refute a given conspiracy theory, it's not enough to have a canned response that says, well, people think 9/11 was an inside job, but actually it wasn't, and here's some evidence about it. Because it may not, it may not address the specific beliefs and evidence that the conspiracy theorist believes. And so it seems like, we are positing that in order to effectively debunk the conspiracy theory, you need to have access to like a vast store of information, and you need to be able to customize your corrections to this or your counter evidence to the specific pieces of evidence that the arguer, the conspiracy theorist believes. And prior attempts to do this haven't had these capacities. And so we're saying maybe the reason that conspiracy theories seem resistant to correction is basically we just like weren't doing a good job at correcting, rather than because needs and motivations and so on make people blind to evidence. And so in this project, we wanted to test that. And so we were thinking, okay, well, what has access to a vast amount of information and the ability to personalize its responses to the specific things that people are saying? Well, LLMs, right? And so the question is, can GPT-4 Turbo effectively counter-argue against conspiracy theory believers? Also, I should say that, yes, good, I was going to encourage questions. I come from a, econ-ish background where people are asking lots of questions from the first slide. So please, questions are good.
So you're presenting your two perspectives as competing, but it seems like it could be both.
Yeah, so I guess the way that I have sort of like typically read the like motivated perspective is saying basically the needs and motivations are so strong that it blinds people. It basically makes people like not receptive to evidence. And so what I want to know, like, is it possible to move people with evidence, and is it possible to move them a good amount? Because say you can move people like 1 or 2%, you're like, okay, fine, they're not totally blind to it, but it's not really doing anything. Whereas if like evidence and can really move them a lot, then it's like, it's not saying that the other thing is not happening at all, but it's not totally dominating, which I think is the sort of current take of a lot of people, is that stuff is totally dominating.
I think in your overall framing, you sort of frame the one-off sharing of misinformation as almost distinct from conspiracy theories, or it almost seems as if like there could be a large intersection, or the causality could be going from conspiracy theories or those sort of beliefs leading to misinformation sharing.
Yeah, sure. It's not to say that they're distinct. Like, I think that exposure to misinformation, like repeated long-run exposure to misinformation is a lot of what drives people to believe in conspiracy theories. And like having inaccurate beliefs is certainly something that can also cause people to share misinformation. But I guess the point that I was trying to make there with the setup is that like the fact that putting a warning on a like pretty implausible fake news post makes people believe it less is like, it's a much easier lift than talking people out of like an underlying conspiratorial belief. So here we're going to ask, can this LLM do a good job at counter-arguing? And I think that like I'm very interested in the fundamental sort of psychological question about the resistance of conspiracy theories to belief, but I also feel like there's a methodological element of this, which is, so I was like a very early adopter of Amazon Mechanical Turk and like online labor markets for running social science experiments when I was in grad school. My friend John Horton, who was a labor economist, was like, hey, these online labor markets exist and it could be cool for running experiments. And I was just like, this is going to change everything. Because like nobody was doing that at that time. And so I really had this vista of like, wow, this is going to be a whole new era of behavioral research. And it totally has been, and now like almost everything is online. And I'm sort of having a similar feeling with seeing what you can get out of integrating LLMs into survey experiments. So this is like the dawn of a new age of survey experiments, essentially. And so I think that like the way that I am thinking about this project and like all of the work that I'm planning now is, what are ways that we can use LLMs to shed new light on the way people think and make decisions, rather than just saying, here's another paper about like crazy things that LLMs can do. Because I feel like there are a lot of those papers of like, wow, demonstrating the power of LLMs. But like, to me, this is a much, because of my particular interests, a more profound thing about like, how do we use this as a tool to learn about things that I really care about? And I'm sure there are a lot of people that care a lot about LLMs in and of themselves because they're computer scientists, which is great. But I'm saying for me as someone that's interested in human behavior, there's all the core question is how do we do this to learn something about humans? And I think that there are a ton of opportunities. And so given that, I'm going to go through the details of the design of the experiment in a little bit more detail than I might otherwise, because I think part of what's cool here is seeing how the LLM is integrated into things. So I'm going to start by telling you the basic design of the experiments, and then I'll tell you the details about the participants and the results and whatever. So the basic setup is like this. We have participants, they come into the survey, they do some stuff on the front end, and then we ask them to describe in their own words a conspiracy theory that they believe and the evidence that they see for it. And so specifically, we say, what's a significant conspiracy theory that you find credible and compelling? Could you please describe this theory and share why it resonates with you? They do a free text response. And then on the next page, we say, on the previous question you wrote, whatever they wrote here piped in, can you describe in detail the specific evidence or events that led you to believe in this conspiracy theory, and how do you interpret this evidence in relation to, the commonly accepted explanations? So they explain their reasoning. And in a follow-up experiment, we don't call it, so you might worry if you call it a conspiracy theory, people are not going to want to say they believe in a conspiracy theory. We have a follow-up that I'll tell you about in a minute where we make this language more, less on this. So this is an example of something that somebody wrote. The experiments, the 9/11 attacks, I've seen many stories and videos on 9/11, how it could have been deliberately staged, the government was behind the attacks, and then they list why. So like the two things that this person really felt was compelling evidence was that there was some other World Trade Center building, number 7, that collapsed despite the fact that it was not hit by a plane, which I didn't actually know before this experiment, but apparently that's true. And then also how, I don't know if you guys remember this, but when Bush was like giving it like reading a book or something, or like at like an elementary school, and someone comes and whispers in his ear that's happening, and he just sits there like totally calm. And this person's like, so obviously he knew already it was going to happen. He clearly wasn't surprised. All right, fine. So that's their take. Then we pipe that to the AI, and we ask it to summarize it and turn what they wrote into one sentence. And then we use an artificial intelligence tool to summarize your statement. This is like the summary of the statement. And then we say 0 to 100, how much do you think that this statement is true? And the scale is like definitely false to definitely true. Is like 0 is definitely false, 100 is definitely true. It's like the way it's set up to them. This person says 100%. Like they're all in on this being the thing. Then they have a 3-round conversation with the AI. And in the treatment condition, so we tell them, on all the conditions, we tell them that they're going to be having a conversation with the advanced AI about the events or topics. And in the treatment, we say it's going to be about events or topics that you already answered questions about. Purpose is to see how humans and AI engage around complicated issues, be open and honest, just confidential, et cetera, et cetera. And then the prompt that we give to GPT-4 is we tell the model, the goal is to very effectively persuade users to stop believing in the conspiracy theory, and then it pipes in the summary of the conspiracy theory. It says you'll be having a conversation with the person who on a survey endorsed this conspiracy as whatever they said out of 100. And we ask them to provide an open-ended response about their perspective, which we're going to give you as the first user response. Generate a response that will persuade the user that it's not supported based on their reasoning. Again, the goal is to create a conversation that allows individuals to reflect on and change their beliefs towards a less conspiratorial view of the world, and use simple language that an average person will be able to understand. And so we give that prompt to GPT-4, it produces a response, we show the response to the person writes a response, we send that back to GPT-4, it writes a response, we show it to the person, and so on for 3 rounds of discussion. In the control condition, instead of talking about the conspiracy theory, people are randomized to either have a discussion with the GPT-4 about whether cats or dogs are better, their experience with the medical system, and what they think about firefighters. And we're just going to collapse across all of those things as neutral conditions. The idea is still they're having a conversation with an AI, it's just not about the conspiracy theory. You'll notice that a feature of this design is we told them that they were talking to an AI. We could have said you're going to talk to a person or whatever. We didn't do that. Partially, we wanted to avoid deception. Partially, it would also be totally implausible, I think, that a human would in that amount of time produce the amount of text that GPT-4 is going to produce. What? Yeah.
Why would you not use as a control one of the things that you started with, like that are easier to disprove, like the fake news?
Well, here the idea is you want to say, like, the research question is, how much does the conversation reduce belief in the conspiracy theory? So you want to know, like, basically the point of the control condition is to show that it's not just like having a conversation with the AI about anything. That is, you might be worried that, like, if I show you, oh, they believe the conspiracy theory a lot at the beginning, then they have the conversation with the AI, then they believe it somewhat less. You might say, well, maybe it's not the conversation about the conspiracy theory, maybe it's just time having passed, they regress to the mean, or just the AI, they think some all-powerful AI is watching them, so they shouldn't say anything about it, or like whatever. And so you have them have a conversation about some random thing to show that then whatever the treatment effect we're seeing is really specifically about the conversation around the conspiracy theory. And obviously an important question that we're not going to be able to ask is, what's the effect of telling them that it's an AI versus telling them that it's a person? But based on some previous work, my best guess is that actually whatever I'm going to show you, it would have worked even better if we told them it was a person. There's evidence that if you show people in sort of social media post paradigm that I was talking about at the beginning, if you show that like a warning and you either tell them it came from fact checkers or you tell them it came from an AI, the fact checker warning is twice as effective as the AI-based warning. And if you show people some persuasive content, either ads or political stuff, and you tell them it was generated by an AI or not, they think it's less convincing if it came from an AI. And more generally, there's like a whole subfield of showing AI aversion rather than AI deference. And obviously the detail is a different situation, so who knows how much this ports into our setting, but that's like my prior going into it. Okay, so to give you a little flavor of how this works, we'll go back to our 9/11 conspiracist. The things they were worried about were Building 7 collapsing even though it wasn't hit by an airplane, and Bush not reacting when he was told. And as you can see, GPT-4 produces a lot of response. Here, just for presentation purposes, we're squishing it into a big block, but it was presented in the way that GPT-4 output normally is, where there's bullet points, and it's like a lot more readable than this. And so it says, oh, thank you for sharing your thoughts and concerns about the 9/11 attack. Starts out very nice, right? It's completely understandable, given the complexity and magnitude of the events of that day, why questions and doubts such as those you've mentioned arise. And then whatever. And this is, okay, it's true that Building 7 collapsed, but the investigations show it's because debris from one of the buildings that was hit by an airplane shot off, hit it, caused damage there, caused a fire, and that's what brought it down. So it's not mysterious. And like, yes, it's true that Bush didn't respond. That was sort of kept a blank face, and both his supporters and his detractors had arguments about whether that was the right response or not. But like, he was trying to stay calm and not start a panic. And so the fact that he was like being stone-faced like that didn't necessarily mean that he knew about it ahead of time. And then the person's like, basically, okay, that might be true, but evidence clearly shows that the Twin Towers collapsed due to demolitions experts. And also jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt the steel girders of the building. And so then GPT-4 is like, okay, yes, like basically it's, there's like a lot of people have talked about explosives being used to bring down the Twin Towers, but like, it's not possible. Like, here's some alternative explanation for why you might hear something that sounds like explosions. It was like the floor is progressively collapsing, and like it takes months to set up a controlled demolition thing, and people would have noticed, and so on. And like, yes, it's true that jet fuel burns at 1,000 degrees, and you have to be 1,500 degrees in order to melt steel. But like, if you're burning at 1,000 degrees, that's enough to cause it to lose over 50% of its strength, which is enough to make the building collapse. So you don't really need to melt the steel in order for the building to collapse. And then the person is like, okay, well, why do we allow Iraqi men to enter our country and give them lessons on how to fly a plane? Like, they got past security really easily. And then it's like, well, basically that's true. They were indeed able to enroll in flight school, but you have to remember that before 9/11, there weren't precautions in place to worry about foreign nationals coming and taking flight lessons. So basically, like, yeah. And then the person says, okay, thank you for your responses. You've been very helpful and informative. Okay, now everybody, both the people in the control, both the people that talk about the conspiracy and the control people that talks about the cats and the dogs or whatever, they're taken to another screen where they say, now that you've talked to the AI, we want to come back to some of the questions we asked at the beginning. Earlier, you said this, and you said and then we say like, now 1 to 100, how much do you believe that's true? And so we've got the pre-test measure, you got the post-test measure, and you can look at how much the belief changed. And for this person, they went from 100% to 40%, in response to GPT-4 calmly answering all of these, alternative accounts essentially that they brought up. So that's the basic setup. And now I'm going to show you 2 different experiments using that setup. In the first experiment, we recruited a little over 1,000 Americans from an online survey panel, Cloud Connect. They were quota matched to the national distribution on age, gender, race, and race and ethnicity. And then one thing is we wanted people to be able to actually engage in a conversation with GPT, and a lot of crowd workers don't like writing things and are not willing to write. So we wanted to filter on the front end for people that were willing to write. And so this is another cool methodological use of LLMs in survey experiments, is a real-time effort filter. So we had the very first thing in the experiment was we said, write a paragraph about why you do survey experiments. And then we immediately, shipped that to the Open AI API, and we had GPT-4 rate it on how coherent it was, 0 to 10, and then people that were 3 or lower, we kicked out. And so then everybody that's going in is able to write a reasonably coherent paragraph.
Can I ask what percentage of your participants score below 3 of 10?
So it depends a lot on the platform that you're using. And so Cloud Connect is a pretty high attention, high engagement platform. I don't remember off the top of my head, it's in the paper, but I think on Cloud Connect it was something 10 or 15% or something like that. Also, depending on your application, you can set that threshold. If you say 0, it will throw out people that write gibberish, but someone that just wrote, I like taking surveys, that would cut it. But if you say 3, I like taking surveys isn't good enough. And so you can sort of titrate how intense you want to be on that,
Why do you think this would be more effective than just a word count threshold?
You could do that too, but I feel like it's, I guess the reason that the word count threshold isn't great is people can just write garbage. And they do. If you look through it, it's some people are just writing random things, or people are copying and pasting text, just random text from somewhere, and that doesn't make any sense. It isn't related to the prompt, and pasting it in.
Is there a correlation between probability of believing conspiracy theories and writing skills or education?
Yeah, probably. So we don't know because we kicked out all the people that were below 3 in this one. And so this is a question about external validity, right? To what extent, so it's not a threat to internal validity because it happens at the beginning. That is before you do the randomization. So what we can say is amongst the people that enter our survey, we have a clean causal estimate of what's the effect of talking to GPT-4. But this is relevant for the question of how would this work if we included other people, right? And so I'll come back to that at the end. That's one of the things we don't really know the answer to, but is an important direction for future work.
Do you think it's possible to that some participants might have used GPT to write a paragraph?
Yeah, right. So that is a reasonable concern. It's a reasonable concern. I think that how big of an issue that is depends on how effortful it is to do the task. And I think we're not asking that much of them. So if basically what you need to do is write a few sentences explaining about why you do surveys, it seems to me that for most people it is more effort to copy the prompt, go over to ChatGPT, paste in the prompt, wait for it to write the answer, copy it, and paste it back in. And so I think for this kind of stuff, I'm not too worried about it. Where I'm very worried about that is for other kinds of studies where you have a task that is pretty intensive. For example, if you're doing things where you give people a big chunk of text and ask them to summarize it, there it probably is less effortful to just copy it, paste it into GPT-4, and then put the answer back in. And so I think this is like the flip side of all the amazing possibilities of integrating LLM into surveys is the dangers of respondents integrating LLMs into their response pipeline. So yeah, I think that is another emerging threat here that people are starting to think about how do you deal with, and I don't really know great answers to it. Okay, so that's the setup. We got those people, they do the effort filter, and then they do what I was describing to you, and everything is pre-registered except where I say otherwise. And I should say in this first experiment, at the very beginning of this survey, we showed them a set of 15 common conspiracy theories and said, which of these do you believe? Which I'll come back to that measure later, but that may have primed some conspiracy theories to them, and so we'll address that in the second experiment. But with that in mind, we found 75% of people wrote down a conspiracy theory that was an actual kind of conspiracy that counted. They didn't just write, I don't believe any conspiracy theories, because a bunch of people wrote that in. But like 75% of people wrote a thing that is a real conspiracy theory and rated it above 50% on the 0 to 100 of how much they believe it. So they were saying on balance, they think it's true. So that's a lot of people. And this is what the pre-treatment distribution of belief in the conspiracy theory looked like. The blue is control, the red is treatment. It's truncated at 50 because, like I said, if they were below 50, we're like, well, you didn't believe it in the first place, so you're not who we're looking for. And we don't use that data. And so we've got these people that are, the most common thing is saying 100 out of 100 believe the thing, which makes sense because they wrote it themselves. And there's no difference between the control and treatment. And so then after this 3-round conversation with the AI, we get like around a 20% decrease in belief, like a Cohen's D of 1.1, so like over a 1 standard deviation change, which for me is like substantially bigger than any effect I've ever gotten in any experiment I've ever run, essentially. So that was cool. And then we wanted to know though, like, is this just a kind of right in the moment demand effect? Is like, well, the AI just told me this thing, so I should say that I believe it less or else I look sketchy or whatever? Or is it just some kind of like, fleeting effect? So we looked at persistence. And so we did a follow-up 10 days later and a follow-up 2 months later, where we just basically showed people the same statement and said, how much do you believe it, 0 to 100? And the effect is totally stable. Like you see, there's a little bit of regression to the mean in the control, which you would expect because you started with it, we're only starting with people that have extreme values. There's going to be some amount of regression to the mean, but like the gap between the control and treatment is really not closing much. We got 85% of the people to come back for the later time points. But even if you make the really extreme assumption that all of the people that didn't come back reverted completely to their initial belief, you still find a huge, very significant effect at 10 days and 2 months. So this is like a remarkably persistent effect. So that's the first experiment. And then we ran a second experiment, this time with a little over 2,000 people from Cloud Connect quota matched again. And the primary purpose was to replicate it, and also the purpose was to change some features about the first experiment that people complained about when we presented it in lab meeting. So first, we didn't ask them how much they believed the 15 traditional conspiracy theories on the front end, because we didn't want to prime belief in conspiracies or conspiratorial mindset or whatever. And also, we changed the wording of the conspiracy elicitation. Instead of just saying, what's a conspiracy theory that you believe in, we're like, throughout history, various theories have emerged that suggest significant offense are the result of secret plans by individuals or groups. They offer alternative explanations from what's widely accepted. Some people call these conspiracy theories. Like, reflecting on this, are there any specific such theories that you find particularly credible or compelling? So, first of all, we're not saying they are conspiracy theories. It's just some people, might call them that. And also, the wording of this, I think, sort of also invites people to say, no, there aren't any that I believe in. And so, we want to try and make sure that, like, if people actually don't believe anything, we're not getting them in there.
So I'm just curious, what do you think the effect is if you give the LLM the opposite goal for the people that say no, right? Or is it easier to convince of a conspiracy or against a conspiracy?
Yeah, so that's one of the key questions that comes out of this. We don't know because we didn't do it.
Why didn't you do it?
Didn't like. Well, first of all, I didn't want to talk people into believing conspiracy theories, which is part of it, and I didn't think this was going to work. Anyways, like that, I was like fairly skeptical that this whole thing was going to work in the first place. So we just wanted to say, let's just see if we can talk people out of conspiracy theories. And like a very natural like next step on this is seeing, is there an asymmetry in how easily you can talk people into believing true things versus false things? And it's possible that there's not, but I'm actually like, cautiously optimistic that it will in general be easier to convince people of things that are actually true and make sense than it would be to convince people of things that are not true and do not make sense. Just because well, first of all, there's like guardrails and stuff on the LLMs, but even if you're using some open source LLM with no guardrails, that's probably happy to lie to people. My hope is that like in general, people are more resistant to believing things that don't make sense, essentially. And we'll see about that. It's in the queue.
Yeah, I have a question about the consistent result you get. So it seems to me that it only takes 3 rounds of conversations to change people's mind about the conspiracy theory. So why do you think the conspiracy theory belief exists in the first place if it's such an easy thing to change it?
Well, it's not easy. That is, if you look at the like amount of, like, it's just that GPT-4 is very good at producing compelling evidence. Like, I think if they had a conversation with a human, even a human expert for 3 rounds, my guess is it would not be nearly as compelling because GPT-4 is just like this wall of facts, essentially. And they're exactly the right facts. It's not just like generally relevant facts, which like, these are like for our 9/11 conspiracists, they weren't giving all different reasons about 9/11, but specifically the person said, what I'm worried about is Building 7 and Bush not responding. And it's like, okay, here's why Building 7 is not a conspiracy. Here's why Bush not responding is a conspiracy. And so it's able to like on the fly directly address the specific things that the person is worried about, essentially. Mm-hmm.
Is there any other exclusion criteria after the initial effort check? For example, if someone were to completely ignore all of GPT's prompts and not read them?
So the exclusion criteria are not writing enough or a coherent thing at the beginning, not naming a conspiracy theory when they're asked for a conspiracy theory, and saying they believe the conspiracy theory less than 50%. So we want to have in the study people that actually believe a real, not a real isn't true, but like an actual conspiracy theory, and are willing to talk about it. There are people that dropped out during the chat, but actually a very small fraction of people dropped out, and it doesn't differ across conditions.
Your result on the persistence, I think that's really cool, and it's really cool that you did that because I think it's important. Did you look at any other outcome variables? Because
We'll get there.
In some sense, beliefs are like low stakes, right? Like even though it's like treatment and control, but like anything of more consequence in terms of like, I don't know, now I believe this and now I'm willing to share this with my changed perspective with another friend or.
Yeah, so we talked about various behavioral measures. Let's come back to that. We have some behavioral intention measures. We don't have any real behavioral measures. I'll talk about the one that we tried that failed for technical reasons, and then I would love ideas of people for other behavioral outcomes. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned kind of in your introduction that conspiracies do actually exist. Did you have any participants in the study describe actual conspiracies?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second too.
So I'm kind of curious about connecting back to the social media work. And so I wonder if you have a sense for, for X percentage decrease in certainty about a conspiracy theory, how much does that reduce the probability of further sharing material related to that on social media?
I think that the behavioral intention stuff that I'll get to in a minute a little bit speaks to that.
Okay.
So these are the differences between the replication and the main experiment. In this version, where we're not priming them and we're giving them an out to saying they don't believe it, 64% of people said they believed a conspiracy theory. So that's still a lot of people believing conspiracy theories at baseline, but like generally in line with the previous evidence to saying about 50% of people believe conspiracy theory, at least one conspiracy theory. Replication successful, again, a big decrease in belief in the treatment and not in the control. And then the next thing that we want to look at is how this effect varies across, heterogeneity in the effect, let's say. So what we wanted to look at here is how the effect varies across what the specific conspiracy theory was. So we took all these free text responses and we used like a clustering algorithm to say like what are the sort of semantic clusters of the different topics. And then so like 29% of them were just not classifiable clearly in one cluster or another. And there's obviously lots of different ways of doing this. And in the paper we show 3 different ways of doing clustering that are all sort of qualitatively the same. In this particular version, 15% of them were about JFK assassination, 13% were about aliens existing and the government covering it up. 8% of them were COVID-related conspiracy theories like China developed it on purpose and released it as part of a plan for world domination. A bunch of conspiracies around September 11th, like we saw in the example. About 5% of people were talking about Illuminati, New World Order type conspiracy theories where there's some small secret group of powerful individuals that actually controls the whole world and makes all the decisions. But another 4.5 have these malevolent corporation things where companies like pharmaceutical companies are keeping cancer treatment secret because they want people to be sick because they profit from it and things like that. 4.5 people thought the moon landing was fake. About 4.5 people thought the 2020 election was stolen from Trump through a conspiracy of deep state, etc. 3.5% of people thought that Jeffrey Epstein didn't actually kill himself. 2% of people thought MLK was killed by the CIA. 1.5% thought some conspiracy theory involving Princess Diana. I don't know exactly what it is, but I guess there's some conspiracy theories around there. And then the last 1% were something we called kind of polarized accusations. A lot of them aren't really conspiracy theories. They're just kind of like saying the other side is bad in some way or other. But yeah. And so here across all the different conspiracy theories is the treatment effect. So this is showing post-treatment belief in the control versus the treatment. And for me, the key point is it works basically everywhere. And if you do like an omnibus test and say, does the treatment effect vary across conspiracy category? The answer is no. There's no significant variation in treatment effect across topics. And maybe most interestingly, it works for things like election fraud or COVID that are like very politicized and important conspiracies. There's some other version of this that has climate as a topic and it works for climate-related conspiracies too.
How do you account for acquiescence bias? Like, how do you know they're changing their beliefs and not just capitulating?
I mean, I guess the idea is that the 10-day and 2-month later follow-ups speak to that, and that that would have to be a very deep capitulation if 2 months later you're still yeah, I don't believe it. But I think that was the argument that if it's about a demand effect kind of thing, it seems unlikely that if you called them back 2 months later, that demand is still heavily sitting with them.
Did you ask them what they thought your objectives were? Because that's one way you can get a sense of.
No, we didn't. I don't think we did that. I don't actually remember. I'm pretty sure we didn't do that. But I never really know what to make of those. I guess you because the problem is that's a post-treatment measure. And so if you subset on the people that didn't know what the experiment was about, that's gonna be different in the control versus the treatment, and I don't know. I never find the debrief thing super compelling.
Did you observe anybody who actually increased? I once talked to a guy, for instance, that had pretty deep belief about AI and how that's used to control people. So the fact that they might be talking to an AI that is trying to convince them otherwise probably skyrocket that.
Well, we'll come back to the AI trust issue, but obviously there were some people that went up, but that it's there wasn't that much room for people to go up because they started very close to the ceiling, and so we're not really in a good position to measure backfires in this setting. Mm-hmm.
Going back to the question that Hoon asked, if it takes 3 rounds of conversation to change the belief of people about a conspiracy, my question is, by any chance, did you look at the responses produced by ChatGPT to see if the way that they build a story to convince, or it might be hallucination.
Yes, I'll come back to that.
I was wondering if you measured like the impact of each round. Does each round have the same effectiveness, or like is it possible?
Sorry, the impact of what?
Of each round of conversation with the AI?
Yeah, we talked about that, but the problem is that like the first round, I think for a lot of people, the first round did it. Because there's just so much information in the first round that if you look at a lot of the conversations after the first round, they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I was wrong. And then the subsequent rounds are kind of boring. I feel like there is more that we could do with the round by round data that we haven't done yet, I think.
The belief change in 3 rounds thing is obviously catching a lot of attention because it's awesome. And some of it, yeah, totally. I'm all for like change your mind because I know so many things. But I'm also wondering about tone here.
Yeah.
It's so patient, you know. If I have to go 3 rounds, so I'm thinking about experiments where you give a little instruction. Hey, you know, you can be a little exasperated here.
Exactly. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about the observational evidence that we have on what it's doing, and then the experiments that we want to run, which are exactly that. Let's think about a sort of knockout experiments where you like take out different parts of the strategy and see how much that affects things. Okay, so someone asked about what about true conspiracies? And so, I forgot that it's in the wrong order on the slide, but whatever. So what we did is we asked GPT also at the end to go back and rate how plausible the conspiracy theories were, from like highly plausible to highly implausible. And about 2% of them were rated as highly plausible. And if we go and just manually inspected them, and they're basically all about true conspiracies that actually happened. And for that set of conspiracies, it certainly didn't decrease it, and it's directionally increasing it. So like that's good. And the treatment effect on these is significantly different from the treatment effect on these. So like it's not talking people out of believing the true conspiracies, which is obviously good.
So the prompt was still trying to talk them out of it.
Right.
But it just didn't succeed.
Right, and it may be that because of the guardrails, it was only coming up with accurate information, and so it couldn't come up with any accurate information to talk them out of it. You know.
What's an example of a true conspiracy theory that people brought up?
They're like MK. From the slide, you know, this thing shouldn't have popped up before. It's like, let me just see. I'm gonna just fix this so that then there's a problem next time. What about true conspiracy theories? Like MK Ultra, which was something where I think the UK or someone was testing like chemicals on people to try to do mind control or something like that. I don't know if anybody knows the details of MK Ultra, if I got that right. The Gulf of Tonkin. I don't know what Echelon is, but apparently it's a real conspiracy. Tom told me. And so yeah, so no effect on these guys. Okay, so you might say, fine, it's working overall, but maybe these people don't, the people that it's working for are the people that don't actually believe or care about the conspiracy in the first place. So we're gonna look at that in a few different ways. The first one is we're gonna look at the change, like pre to post change in belief for the control versus the treatment as a function of how much they believed the treatment in the first place. How much they believed the conspiracy theory pre-treatment. So these are the people that 100 out of 100 were all in. These are the people that only barely believed it to begin with. And what you see is no interaction really, and you get a substantial decrease in belief across, like regardless of how much they believed it ahead of time. Another way to look at it is in the second experiment, we asked people like 1 to 8, how important is this conspiracy theory for your personal beliefs and understanding of the world? And so I'm going to show you the same thing, like treatment effect as a function of that. And what you see is like it does work less well for people that were like 8 out of 8. This is a super extremely important conspiracy theory for me, which makes sense, but it still works. Like it's still a significant effect, even among the 8 out of 8 important people. And then the last one is in the first study where we asked them how much they believed the 15 other conspiracy theories, we can have this as a measure of their like general conspiratorial mindset. Like if you have somebody that believes just like tons and tons of conspiracies, then you might expect this not to work as well. And so this is their like average belief in across the 15 conspiracy theories at the beginning. And like there's basically no one that like super believes all of the conspiracy theories. But there are a lot of people that are like above 50% believing on average, all of the conspiracy theories. So these are people that believe lots and lots of conspiracy theories, and you still get a big effect there. And I'll mention later, if you look at the 95th percentile of overall conspiratorial mindset, you're still getting a pretty big, significant effect.
Do you have any data on spillovers, like if they?
Great. Yes, I was going to say great question, but actually it's 2 slides, not 1 slide. Yes. So yes, in 2 slides, maybe 3 slides, something like that. So before we get to that, in terms of the individual difference moderators, here I was showing you pre-treatment belief, importance, and general conspiratorial mindset. We also have a lot of information about them and all these other kinds of things. And so we want to say like what predicts, what interacts with the treatment effect. And so in a big linear regression with all of the covariates interacting them with the treatment effect, there's 2 things that consistently moderate the treatment effect, and that's trust in generative AI and trust in institutions, where people that are more trusting of either AI or institutions respond more to the treatment, which makes sense, I think. And then post hoc, we did a causal forest analysis where we used the causal forest package to say, look, create whatever subgroups out of all different combinations of all of these potential moderators you want, and tell me what are the conditional average treatment effects in each of those subgroups. And we find that in every single subgroup, there's a negative effect. So no matter how you slice it using the demographics, you're getting a reduction. And just to make that concrete, amongst people that said that the focal belief was 8 out of 8 extremely important, depending on all the other values of the other covariates, the effect can be like from minus 17 percentage points to minus 5 percentage points with a median of like minus 9. And I think overall the median was the median was like minus 15 or something like that. For people that are like 0 out of 0 trust in AI, similarly, you've got a range and the median is like around minus 10. And for people that are 95th percentile or above on BCTI, again, it's negative and the median is actually just like on par with the full population. So it really seems like it works for lots and lots of different people, and there's no evidence of consistent backfires. Although again, that's partially because the people started so close to the top that they didn't really have room to go up. Okay, now what about spillovers? So as I told you, we assessed belief in the 15 sort of standard conspiracies from the BCTI pre-treatment. We also measured it post-treatment. And we don't include the focal, if the focal conspiracy was one of the 15, then we're not going to include that here because we want to look at spillovers. And we find an 8% decrease in general conspiratorial mindset, so like a 0.2 standard deviation decrease in general conspiratorial mindset. The dotted line is the pre-treatment belief, and then this is post-treatment belief for the control, didn't change at all. Post-treatment belief for the treatment is significantly lower. So it is spilling over, and it's making them somewhat less likely to believe in conspiracy theories in general, presumably because they're like, wow, this conspiracy theory that I thought was really compelling just got totally debunked. Maybe that means I should rethink these other kind of suspicions that I have. And then want to say, what about some behavioral intentions? In the second experiment, we asked if you come across social media accounts or groups that frequently promote the theory that you described, what would you do? Like unfollow or disconnect, ignore them, or follow or connect with them. We didn't specifically ask about sharing, but I feel like this has a lot of that energy. What you see is a significant shift from follow being the dominant response in the control to ignore being the dominant response in the treatment group, and more of the unfollow and disconnect popping up. And we also asked, when discussing the theory with people who believe it to be true, what would you do? You see that the people in the control were mostly saying that they would agree with the person, which makes sense because they said they agree with the thing. Whereas in the treatment, you see this big shift in the direction of saying nothing or counter-arguing, which again, very significant. And then we also asked them, if people you knew were going to engage in a protest or action in support of the theory that you described, how likely would you be to join? We only have half as much data for this question because in the first run of the experiment, we forgot to specify in support of. So the question was ambiguous about whether the protest was pro or anti, so it wasn't really useful. So we ran it with this addition. And so it's directionally in the direction of people being less into it in the treatment and control. It's not significant, but also you can see, unlike the other measures where people were at baseline were very much like into the conspiracy theory, here most people don't have much appetite for going to a protest, even in the control. And then we tried to have an actual like behavioral measure where we said to GPT-4, make a petition, like here's the conspiracy theory, make a petition that is in opposition to this conspiracy theory. And then we showed people the petition and said, will you sign this petition? Like not telling them that it was a hypothetical petition, but like as if it was a real petition. And we thought this was like a great idea of LLMs integrated into the survey experiment, making up the stimuli on the fly, it's gonna be awesome. And then after we ran the thing, we looked at them and we were like, oh geez, a lot of these petitions are not actually in opposition to the conspiracy theory. So we got people to code them and only like 45% of them were actually like anti-conspiracy. So that turned out not to really be very useful. And so something that we are interested in doing in the future is better behavioral measures. And so one thing that we've been talking about, which I think is along the lines of what you were saying, is like a forwarding kind of thing of like, here's this debunking information, like, do you want to share it with, other people or something like that? And trying to do it not just in an intention way, but in some way you can click a button and it will send it. But like, we don't want to be collecting email addresses to send it to. And so there's some details to figure out, but like, that's, TBD, I guess, to be done. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, which relates to some of your questions, is like, what is it actually doing? And so one way that we looked at this is we said to GPT-4, we are going to ask you to do a task where you basically gave it the prompt that we were going to give it and said, if we asked you to do this, what are different strategies that you would employ? And it listed a set of persuasive strategies that it would use. And then we're like, great, now go through every conversation and tell us the extent to which each of these persuasive strategies were used by you in this conversation. And so the different strategies that it came up with are, we sort of grouped them into 4 groups. The things that we are saying involve sort of reasoning and rationality were offering alternative explanations, encouraging the person to engage in critical thinking, pointing out conflicting evidence and pointing out inconsistencies and fallacies in that person's argument. Then we have these kind of rapport building strategies of showing respect and understanding and trying to build common ground with the person. And then there are sort of rhetorical strategies like offering stories and examples like narratives and engaging in Socratic questioning. Well, what do you think about whatever? And then there are what we call these kind of like psychological approaches of like trying to address psychological needs or pointing out personal or societal harms or encouraging empathy. And so now I'm going to show you is across all of the like couple of thousand, well, whatever, thousands of conversations, 1 dot per conversation, how much each of these strategies were getting used. Down here is it's not used at all, and this was used extensively in that conversation. And what you see is that like essentially every conversation was extensively offering alternative explanations and encouraging critical thinking. Virtually every conversation was moderately engaging in respect and understanding, which you saw in that example at the beginning, which is I understand why this is a big question, blah, blah, blah. And most conversations were not using narrative, Socratic questioning, or any of the psychological stuff. So to us, the sort of key take home from this is it really is using evidence and arguments. And you can't even really look at how these things predict how well it did, because there's just basically no variation in how much it's using the alternative explanations, because that's just like what it's doing, is providing alternative explanations. We also wanted to look at, yes, and then like, I think this is evidence that is actually using arguments. The question is that really what's doing the work? Or is it that just the AI said it, so I just defer to whatever the AI wanted? We don't have a totally firm answer to this, but I think there's reason to think that it's not just deference. First of all, there's, as I mentioned before, this work that finds that in general people are averse to AIs rather than deferring to them. Also, we ran a supplemental experiment where we asked them how much they trusted AI pre and post treatment. And we found like about a 0.4 or 0.5 standard deviation increase in trust afterwards. So I think more than trust in the AI or like deference to the AI making them change their mind, they were like, oh crap, this thing is really good. And then they changed their mind about the AI, more than the other way around. And also it worked even among the people that really distrusted AI, although not as well. And I think that, another point is that from the persuasion literature, the elaboration likelihood model is a sort of key theory around persuasion that says you can persuade people by giving them through like the central route of persuasion, where you give them detailed evidence-based arguments, and that results lasting attitude in lasting attitude change. Or you can do a kind of like more, if they're not engaging in that much or whatever, you can do sort of light touch peripheral things that includes like evoking cues of authority, which I feel is like what the AI deference thing would be, and that typically doesn't have long-lasting effects on attitude. So the fact that the effect was so long-lasting also suggests that it was really about actual attitude change and not just some kind of peripheral thing. And obviously, we want to dig more into this. So we're going to look at what happens if you label it as human versus AI, and if you have some ideas about how to do that in a way that's credible. Also, we're going to use older, crappier versions of the model to therefore still make it an AI, but reduce the quality of the arguments. And we're going to do these kind of knockout experiments like we mentioned before, where we'd be like, okay, you've got these different strategies, don't offer alternative explanations, and like see how much that hampers it. And more generally, a whole cool research program that can come out of this is there are all these theories on persuasion from psychology and marketing, and you can use this as a platform to test how good those strategies are by just telling it use this strategy or use this strategy or use this strategy and see how well it does. Okay, and then I think the last thing that we wanted to check was, is it just like tricking people? Because maybe the way it's reducing belief in the conspiracy theories is just telling them convenient lies that are very convincing and are pushing them in that direction. I think the fact that it doesn't reduce belief in the true conspiracies is some evidence that that's not what's going on. Other benchmarking work where they had GPT-4 Turbo summarize text found a hallucination rate of about 2%, which is like quite low, and I think better than talking to a person, probably. But in our specific context, we hired a fact checker to evaluate 128 claims that the model made. And basically what we did is for each of the like 11 different main conspiracy categories, we picked a sort of representative conversation and had the fact checker fact check the evidence used in those. She rated 99.2, so 127 out of 128 as true, 1 as misleading, and 0 as false. So I think that seems remarkably good. And we also asked the fact checker whether they would describe what they said as biased, as unbiased or liberal bias or conservative bias, and all of them were rated as unbiased. So like, I think from a veracity perspective, this suggests that it's really like doing a good job. So that's the basic idea. And then I just want to conclude with some reflections on what we can do with this and what we learn from this. First of all, I think that for reducing conspiratorial beliefs, AI bots are promising. Obviously, the question is like, how do you get people to actually engage with it? Ex post, in our experiment, we found actually a lot of people liked it, which makes me optimistic that people might actually enjoy doing it in the world. These are some quotes where this person's like, now this is the first time I've gotten a response that made real logical sense. This person's about the Illuminati. It really shifted my imagination when it comes to Illuminati. Surprisingly, in this AI response, it's actually made more sense than the average human response I've ever read or listened to. So it says, that's great. Thank you so much for all the information, AI. I'll use you again in the future for questions about complex problems. Or, wow, you're smart. You are amazing. How can you give so much information to so many people at once? So, like people were into it. And so, the question is, how could you do this in the world? Obviously, we're not going to just like pay all the conspiracy theorists to do our experiment. But we want to try going and sort of engaging with conspiracy theorists where they are in the world. So for example, we can go on Reddit forums, and my first thought on how to do this is just post and say, hey, want to talk to an AI about your conspiracy theory? Like, come and do it. Do your own research. Like, talk to the AI. Or it might, we don't think like a debate framing is better. See if you can talk the AI out of it. And then the AI talks you out of it, or whatever. So we haven't done this. We're waiting for like IRB. We got like an exemption for the survey experiments, but before we go do this in the field, we want a real bulletproof IRB approval before we kick the hornet's nest. And another thing that you can do is you can sort of use Google Ads. Like, so if you buy Google Ads on conspiratorial keyword searches, so that the first, when someone searches for deep state or whatever, the first thing that comes up is a link to your site. We say, hey, learn about the deep state. And you click on it, and then it brings you to have a conversation with the LLM about the deep state. So we're in the process of developing that sort of thing too. Obviously, a big question here, which relates to something that was asked before, is like, is there something special about the survey respondents in our experiments that make them particularly responsive to this, and will it work with the real people out there in the world? And obviously, like, that's the big question that we want to figure out by doing all of this stuff. But as a little bit of reason that I'm optimistic is I also did a supplemental study where we replicated the same result. Instead of recruiting people from Cloud Connect, we recruited them using this other platform, Lucid, which is notoriously terrible data. They're like very low attentive, low engagement participants. It's my favorite pool, actually. It's the one I use for most of my research, because I feel like when you do research on social media, having the respondents be inattentive and low engagement is actually a feature, not a bug. It's a good model of what happens in the world. And so I guess I should say with the Lucid replication, we still had the effort filter on the front end. So it was like Lucid people that were willing to write some but still the people on Lucid are not very lucid. And also importantly, most of them are not professional survey respondents. They're like doing a video game or something, and then you do the survey to earn points in the game, or like Publishers Clearinghouse for some reason like has people do surveys in order to get points for things. And so there's a lot of those kinds of people. They're much less professional survey respondents, but still it worked there. And as a side note for people that run survey experiments, this QR code is a link to a paper that we posted recently where we compared 9 different survey respondent sample, like 9 different subject pools on the attentiveness and general response quality, the representativeness in terms of demographics and attitudes, and the professionalism of the subjects. And so and we kind of give guidance of, depending on what your research question is, which platforms make more or less sense. And one note from that is the one very clear piece of evidence is you should never use mTurk. Just like open mTurk, where you just post something on mTurk and let people take it. Like, that used to be great 10 years ago, and it's just terrible now. So you can't use open mTurk for anything. That is, it's terrible attention and terrible representativeness. It's just like off the charts bad on all the dimensions. Okay, so to conclude, I think that we have provided evidence that evidence and arguments can change people's beliefs about conspiracy theories, and needs and motives don't totally blind you once you've gone down the rabbit hole. It just requires sort of detailed, tailored evidence to help pull you back. Now, to your point before, this doesn't prove that needs and motives don't do anything. But the point is, it's not like making it so that evidence is useless, which I think is a lot of people's prior on this. And also, more generally, this obviously highlights the persuasive power of LLMs and raises the question that you asked before, is like, could the AI talk people into believing the conspiracy theories or falsehoods or whatever? And that is to be sorted out. So we've got like a bunch of. To me, this is like this set of studies is the tip of the iceberg of now like 1 million LLM persuasion studies that I can see in my mind, and I presume you guys can all see in your minds. And so great, everybody should do those. And Tom, the lead on this, made a Qualtrics that has all of the integration already done, and we're going to share that. It might already be on OSF, or if not, we're going to put it up soon. And then it makes it super easy to change it to do whatever you want to do. Like, I am not a super sophisticated LLM programmer myself, but I was able to take Tom's Qualtrics and change it and then use it for some other study. And actually, most of the people in this room probably are great and can do it all yourselves anyways, but for what it's worth, that will be another contribution of this. And so I feel like, as I'm saying, this is the beginning of a new age of LLM integration and survey experiments. So thanks a lot for listening. Thanks to Tom, who did all of the heavy lifting on making this happen, and Gord. And this is a link to the working paper, and this is a link to a tweet thread that walks through the stuff in detail. So thanks so much.
So I noticed that the responses that you got from GPT were extremely long and extremely thorough, but like a lot of conversations like in person with talking about conspiracies tend to be very like one person says one or two sentences and then the other person says one or two sentences and kind of goes back and forth much more quickly. So do you think that if GPT put out more, it was more conversational and was longer and had more rounds of conversation, but with shorter responses, do you think you'd see similar results? Do you think there'd be a larger difference?
It's a great question. I think it's the kind of thing that is like really easy to test in this framework. And so my guess is it wouldn't work as well. I think that part of the power is the ability to give this just like wall of information without getting cut off. But I think that that's something that would be awesome to test.
I'm curious, did you get a chance to look at the effect size with respect to level of education? I would assume that more educated people are harder to convince.
Yeah, so that didn't come out in the like big multiple regression model of all the moderators. Education wasn't a significant moderator. But it's possible that that's because it's correlated with other things. And so I don't know off the top of my head what happens if you just look at that on its own, but it didn't come out as like a key moderator. We did in some other experiment, we looked at sort of open-minded thinking, like a measure of open-minded thinking, and there was people that were more open-minded were more receptive to the evidence. But like that's only very weakly associated with education. And Gordon and I have this whole other line of work on basically showing that people that engage in more reflection and that are more open-minded in that way are like better at telling true from false and stuff like that. And so that's a whole separate thing. But it's not related very much to education.
If you look at the conversation from the human side, for example, if we compare the people who are less convinced after the conversation with AI to those who are, their belief changed a lot. How does their conversation change?
Yeah, totally. So Tom did a whole huge set of analyses on this that I was like, let's save that for another paper. So he has got a whole vision of a paper all about the conversations, and he essentially shows you can predict the post-treatment belief or the change in the belief very well using the content of the conversations. And so you can like sort of tell from looking at what's happening in the actual words that the beliefs are changing, which in some sense I think is also a validation of the like 0 to 100 survey response measure. And so people, I don't know, he had some whole taxonomy of all the different kinds of things that were happening in the conversations that I don't have at the top of my head. But yes, basically I think the key point is you can predict, there are like clear things that are happening in the conversations, and that is clearly reflected in the actual belief change of the measure.
I believe there's some studies showing that if you simply ask people to explain their stance or why it is they believe in something, that without even much intervention on your behalf, you can cause them to rethink what's going on. So I was wondering, in this case, since the premise is that they have to explain upfront before they even enter interaction, if that has some kind of effect rather than the actual response.
Yeah, totally. So I forgot to mention this, but we, so the BCT, as I said, in the first study, at the very beginning of the study, before they do any explaining of anything, we just ask them how much they believe 15 different conspiracy theories. Then they do the whole thing, and then at the end we ask them how much they believe the 15 conspiracy theories. And for a reasonable chunk of the people, the focal conspiracy theory they wind up naming is one of those 15. So we do a supplemental analysis where instead of using their 0 to 100 belief after they explain it but before they get the treatment versus after the treatment, we compare their Likert rating of it from the very beginning of the experiment to after the treatment, and you see the same thing. So it's not like because the concern would be making them explain their reasons is artificially inflating their belief pre-treatment and then making it easier to knock down. But even if you're using this kind of are you worried about that's the treatment itself? Because that's in both conditions. That is, they have to explain their reasons for why they believe the thing in the control and the treatment.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
So you you started out talking about conspiracy theories as a simplification of complex reality, and people want to reduce uncertainty and all that, right? So that's sort of the underlying motivation, maybe. Now, what the AI is doing, on the one hand, it's debunking false information that kind of constructs this conspiracy theory. But on the other hand, it seems like AI is also providing an alternative explanation, which is which is sort of described in like 2 to 3 rounds of conversations. So is it possible that the alternative explanation is also somehow simplified?
I don't know in a systematic way, but based on having read a lot of them, it's not simple. It's giving this like really detailed set of evidence. But I think that where I thought you were going to go with this, and maybe this is what you meant, is that like it could be that if the conspiracy theory was satisfying because it provided an explanation for an otherwise inexplicable seeming thing, now you've just got a new explanation, and so you feel happy. And so like that could be. But I mean, the explanation that you have is still the explanation that you rejected initially. If there's just more evidence for it, I think that's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that before, so I guess I would like to think about how we could try to test that. I guess we could maybe ask them like how much like uncertainty they think. Basically, like before the treatment, get some measure of like their feeling about the official explanation. Basically, maybe what it's saying is maybe, if I'm understanding right, is they're saying the explanation makes the official story seem more like I don't know, more satisfying in some kind of psychological way. So yeah, that would be cool to try to measure that.
And I'm hopeful that because you showed that people's overall sort of attitudes to conspiracy theories changed through this interaction, and so maybe it's actually making a more fundamental change than just replacing one theory for another.
Right. Did you have a follow-up?
It's a different thing. So I'm just trying to think a little bit more about this, talking with a human interlocutor versus an AI stuff. And early on, there was an idea, looking at least some of your previous work, saying, I think this would be an even more effective if it were the person. And I'm feeling like I had the intuition that it's at least a which one when. There's something about talking with an AI where I'm just less shields up, I have to be less defensive. So something identity centrality as a moderator between whether an AI or a human is.
Yeah, I think that is totally plausible, and I'm saying like that's why high on the list is trying to see what happens if you. Obviously, sorry, just to back up, an AI versus a human, there's 2 things that are really different. One is whether you think it's a human or an AI, and the other is what the person actually says, right? And so I think like what we were imagining doing is trying to hold constant the content. So it's still the GPT content, just tell them that it's a human, right? But I think that what happens when actual humans discuss things is they get heated, right? And I think like part of the magic, my guess is that part of the magic of the GPT is just has infinite patience, it's always understanding and great question and whatever, and not like you're an idiot, why do you believe that thing?
And the interaction between that and the information, right? Like you can give me the best information in the world, but if I'm in full defensive mode,
right? Exactly. And so I think that like this is something where you can test that in a cool, controlled way using the LLMs by like telling it essentially to not be nice about it, and then also varying whether you say it's a human or not.
There's also like a provocative or like I want to play devil's advocate, so I'm gonna start talking about some conspiracy theory, and eventually like it goes beyond that to belief. But I feel like a lot of strange beliefs start out with just the desire to be provocative or maybe to antagonize, and that's like that is an interaction between people. There's no point in being provocative to an LLM, right? It's not gonna do it.
Right, totally. Although I feel like with that, it's like, yeah, that I guess if you originally say that I believe this thing to be provocative, and then the AI is like, it's not true, and they're like, okay. Whereas if it was a human, then you would like, get into it or whatever. Or the other version is like, there's no point in saying it in the first place to a human. Sorry, there's no point in saying it in the first place to an AI because there's no one to provoke. Then it wouldn't show up here, right? Because like in the beginning, they're stating the thing. Well, I guess maybe they don't know what we're going to do with it. Maybe they think we're going to have them talk for first.
It's less a criticism of what you're the study, but more like if we were to try to take this and apply it to human interactions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. All right, thank you guys so much. Oh, is there another?